Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. This is the second of the viewers selected orchids. So the orchids in this video were voted on by yourselves for a spotlight on each. There's 5 orchids in the video. They are relatively random, although there's quite a high hit on one particular genus. That's how it goes. I do have a lot of them and 3 were selected at this level. So the first video, the top 5, as the order I do these in doesn't really matter, I will put the first video up as an end screen, so you can click on that if you like this video and you'd like to see more of the same. There's a second video, which in fact was the first one, tagged on the end of this one. I'll put a link to it in the description as well, for those who can't play with end screens. So that's that. Now the principle of these videos was to, I gave a list of all of my orchids, which I did. I read out and people were encouraged to leave their votes for their top 5 orchids in the comments. I then put those in a spreadsheet, analysed them and came up with the top 5. This is the second top 5 and we've got 2 that scored well and then 3 that got 3 votes each. There are quite a few others with 3 votes each. They will make up the third video, because after that everything goes down to 1 or none. So there will only be 3 in the set. This is number 2. Now I will bring each plant, the only plants that I've got obviously, I will bring each plant up in turn. We'll have a chat about my plant and if it's a species, where it would come from in the wild, if it's a hybrid, where the species that make it up, what they are and where they might come from, type of environment it ought to be growing in and all that sort of stuff. So a spotlight on each of the 5. Okay, let's get going. Okay, this is Dendrobium hibiki. This one got 6 votes, the highest number of votes in this set of 5. It's funny, when you do some work like this, you actually find stuff out that you didn't know, and some of it's useful stuff. So I had a look, if you've got a hybrid and you want to find out what went into it, just look it up on Orchid Roots and it will show you the ancestry of the hybrid, in other words what went into it, with pictures. So you get an idea of how the hybrid was actually created. Now this, I didn't realise, is a primary cross. So it's actually a cross between 2 species. And they are Bracteosum and Lavifolium. Neither of which I knew anything about, so away we go and we look it up. Now the Bracteosum first, that part of this hybrid. So we're looking at a hot to warm grower. So that's right up out the end of intermediate into the warm section for a start. So you could say, well, that's not going to do very well where you grow, is it? And no, it wouldn't in its natural form. Don't forget it's been crossed with something else. They will share their traits as a primary cross. It comes from, that particular species comes from New Guinea, Papua, and those sort of islands around that area. So it's a distinct area where many orchids come from. Tends to grow in mangroves and rainforests, along rivers and coastlines. It's fragrant, and the most important feature, because it's a very pale coloured bloom, it has a bright orange centre. So that's our first species that's gone into this, a warm to hot grower. The trait on the bloom that's quite dominant is the orange centre. And it comes from rainforest basically and mangroves, so it would come from relatively high humidity areas, but a warm to hot grower. It was difficult to find out whether it's a high light orchid or a low light orchid, but anything that comes from a rainforest doesn't tend to be a highlight orchid, because if you're under the tree canopy, well, you're not going to get the highlight, are you? If it only grew in clearings or, you know, exposed areas, then the write-ups would say that, I would imagine. So that's that. And then the other species that went into this is lavifolium. Now this is much more temperature tolerant and can be found at higher levels. So, you know, this has added into the traits of the hybrid some temperature tolerance. So the combination of the two is now probably not a warm to hot grower, but an intermediate grower. So it should do okay here then, just about. I say just about. Now again, this comes from similar areas, New Guinea, Solomon Islands, that sort of area. And it's purple. So the previous one had an orange centre, but was a pale coloured bloom. And this one doesn't have an orange centre, but is purple. So you can see what somebody's idea what was here. Well, let's get a relatively temperature tolerant hybrid that's a lovely deep purple colour with an orange centre. And bingo, that's just what they got. Now this other one, this second one, lavifolium, is a winter resting type. This shouldn't stay wet through winter. It shouldn't be allowed to go totally dry for any long periods or anything, but you've now introduced that factor into the hybrid, one that doesn't want to stay moist throughout the year. You've introduced that drier in winter concept. But you have to bear in mind this particular one is often found on mossy trees. Yeah, so its roots would be in moisture, even though the weather might be drier in the winter time, the roots might not be. You have to say might, because unless you're going to go out there and have a look at some growing in the wild, then you can only surmise, you know, by the write-ups. So there we go, that's all about this one, that's where this one comes from. Now my plant, out of the ones I've had, this one is exceptional. I've had several of these, and this one is growing incredibly well. I put my hand on there, you can see the size of the plant. It's a good sized plant. It's got many new growths, some of which are still pushing on, some of which are still extending, new leaves still coming out the top, so they haven't reached their terminal leaf. It does have a habit of the leaves sticking a bit. Can I find another one? I've just unstuck one. Yeah, here's one. The centre leaf is stuck to the previous one. But they do push themselves out on their own, but you can help them as long as you don't damage them, obviously, and then they'll open up quicker. But nonetheless, this plant, apart from this little bald spot here, has got an awful lot of new growths on it. Now it tends to bloom down there, near the centre, near the base, and yet the traits on the two species say that the blooms come farther up the canes. But so far this has only bloomed down near the centre. It also grows kikis. There are several on here. There's a nice one there with roots. That would make a new plant. So I was just thinking you probably can't see that. There, it's a kiki growing off an old cane there, an old leafless cane. So it will produce kikis on older canes. It doesn't seem to produce them on new canes. So it tends to also bloom not only around the base, but on the older canes, so not on the new growths. So given that most of these are new growths, some of them are not. This is not a new growth. This is an older growth here. So is this. So there are some older growths, but they've still got their leaves. They're not going to grow anymore. They've reached their terminal leaf thing, the last one. There's not going to be any more. So those are going to age and be the older canes. And at some point they will drop their leaves. So that's the place where I'd be looking for buds in the future. And I won't be looking for those buds for some time, I don't think. The other thing about this one is when it blooms, the blooms last absolutely ages, which is an unusual trait for Dendrobiums. So there we go, that's my plant. Seems to be doing very well. some older growths where hopefully we'll get some buds, probably later on in this year, towards the end of this year maybe. And yeah, I'm pleased with it. I've lost a couple of these. I certainly didn't like one I had mounted. It grew okay for about a year and a half and then just whack, 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 just went. Some Dendrobiums do that. They seem to be doing okay and then they just die suddenly, you know, and quite quickly. Anyway, that's the first one. On to the second one. Okay, on to the second one then. This is Dendrobium Spectabile. This got 4 votes. It's a Latoria type, and I think out of the few Latoria types I've got left, people wanted a Latoria type in there. Unfortunately, within the Latoria types, there is a lot of variety in care, and not all the same. So you have to come down to plant level. Nonetheless, we are looking at a species, and this should not be growing here. This is a hot grower. Not warm to hot, it's a hot grower. This likes really good temperatures, up to the limits of where orchids are actually grown. Because you get too hot and you won't find orchids. There's a limit to what they can tolerate. But this one is up the top there. Again, rainforest, mangroves, sort of mossy areas, Papua, New Guinea, Solomon Islands, that sort of area. And it's normally found between 300 and 500 metres, so not down at sea level as such, a bit higher up than that, but still in the hot zone. But occasionally it can be found up to 2,000 metres, which starts getting cooler. You get up to that sort of height, but still not cold or cool. So, you know, it's one of those. And it's a dryer in winter. But go steady. It shouldn't really dry right out. But this is a difficult one for me to grow. So I'm never quite sure what I should be doing with it. But recently it has come into growth. It's pushed up these tiny little growths here, and there's another one starting now. The thing that's wrong with this is it's in far too big a pot. I'll see if it will come out. Probably not. No, it's not going to come out. But basically the pot is far too big. It was a gift. There's no way I'd have chosen to buy this. It's not suitable. This was only just suitable for where I used to grow, and it's certainly not suitable for here. It has bloomed. It did bloom not long after I got it. And if you look here, we have some nubbins. Now, whether they're going to push on and actually produce flowers or not, I really don't know. Debatable. Probably not. But it has bloomed once. This is on the list for a repot. When it's repotted, it will go in a much smaller pot. I've made up my mind, by hook or by crook. You're going in a much smaller pot. The problem is, it needs a dribble of water now and again in the winter. And it's difficult to know where that dribble needs to go when the pot's big. Yeah? Especially when some of the roots may well be hidden towards the centre of the pot. So I might not even be watering the area of the pot where the roots are. Whereas if it's in a much, much smaller pot, the chances are all the roots will be around the outside of the pot, and that's where I can give it a dribble of water. Anyway, not a good plant. Not my best plant by a long shot, but nonetheless it is coming into growth. It's, as I say, it's pushed up to weak growths. There's another one coming. If I can get this into another pot, much smaller pot, then maybe these new growths will produce enough roots to actually push this one on. And see, the thing is, it's never going to do well, so it's difficult to know what to do to just keep it going. And some might say, why are you bothering? Well, I'm bothering because I've got it and it's coming into growth. Otherwise, maybe I wouldn't be. So that's that one. Okay, on to the third one on the list. This is a Coelogene, and it's Lawrenceana. This only got 3 votes, but nonetheless that pushed it above most of the others, so it comes into here. This is in desperate need of a repot. new growths, whoops, new growths, and very lopsided because of these big heavy leaves hanging out the side and that bulb. It's right on the edge of its pot. It wasn't potted that well, not me, somebody else. But basically the back of the plant, if the back of the plant had been pushed right up against the back of the pot, then these new growths would be on the edge of the pot and it could stay in there. But it's got good roots, but therein lies a particular problem with most coelogenes. They do not like their roots disturbed, and I think you can virtually say that across the genus. They do not like root disturbance, and many have a habit of sulking. To explain what I mean by that, you repot them and they stop growing and don't start again for quite a long time. So they almost become dormant. They're not dying or anything like that, they're just sulking. Stick them on the grumpy bench and take no notice of them for a while. They might come back again. But some of those can do that for a couple of years before they get going again. So when you repot these, when I repot this, it will be filmed, very, very, very gently with the roots. Touch them as little as possible, damage them as little as possible. And if there's a couple of bits of old media stuck to the roots, leave it there rather than damage that root. Just pulling old media off a root will pull the outside skin off of it and it'll be damaged, and then it'll probably just die from that point. So you've got to go very, very careful with these. Now this comes from Vietnam mainly, and the Himalayas, and it's particularly found around Mount Lang Bian at 2,500 meters. It's cool. It's a cool grower, and it comes from montane forests at those temperatures. Now its name comes from Sir James Lawrence, who was president of the RHS for some considerable time, and it was named in his honour when it was discovered. Where it grows, it would get moisture most of the time, and it would be quite humid most of the time. But in my book, like all orchids, if it's not growing, then it doesn't want to be soaking wet. There again, it probably doesn't want to be completely dry either. So this is where you've got to get a watering technique on your orchids. When they're not growing is their difficult time. That's the time when too much water is applied by many people and the roots rot and they lose their orchid. So consider, what is your orchid doing? If it's actively growing, then it will use the moisture you give it. Okay, so that's that. Now the blooms on this are strange, they're sequential. So it grows a spike which can have several blooms on, but they open one at a time. So when one falls, the next one pushes on and opens above it, and then so on until it's finished. Not that many, but they are very large and very long lasting. They tend to be one at a time on a spike. But if you can get several spikes on the go at the same time, you can have quite a nice show. But people who are interested in this particular orchid, it's mainly for its large, single, very fragrant blooms that it produces. So that's that one. Needs a repot, and it's on my red list, like now. And it needs to be got on with before these new growths start pushing roots down out on the outside of the pot. That would then need disturbing, yeah? So I want to get this done before the new roots start, so that the new roots go straight into the media, and just hope that the disturbance doesn't stall it and the new growths stop. There's that possibility. Watch this space, as they say. Okay, this is number 4. This got 3 votes, and so did the last one, that got 3 votes. And there are quite a few others with 3 votes that will go into the next video. Change of genus again, we're on to an Oncidium species now. And this is Chirophorum. And it's a miniature. And I'm hoping that the camera stays in focus, because rather than move all the tripod and everything like that, I've zoomed in on it. I don't normally use my zoom unless I absolutely have to. Now this is a cool to cold grower from higher montane rainforests. So high enough up that it's lost all its heat, but nonetheless maintains its humidity. And it's often found where it's exposed to full sun. So often on large branches where the tree cover has where the canopy cover has gaps. So for parts of the day it can be in full sun. Unusual for an Oncidium, but there we go. And part of the world this one comes from is from Mexico down to Colombia, and virtually everything in between, so in that region of Central America. It's not really got any advice on how much water at which time of year, which implies that it ought to stay moist all of the time and doesn't have a rest period as such. But nonetheless, I'll still add in the same thing as I always say: don't drown the roots of an orchid that's not growing. You will lose them. Yeah? Now this one was subject to some root loss, but luckily not all of it, when I repotted it after I got it, and it sulked and it didn't do very well for a bit. Whereas now it's started to grow and has several nice new growths that should produce a new root system. It hasn't long been repotted, so I don't think it's certainly not on my emergency repot list. It's on my repot it when you get round to it list. That's the lazy repotting list. Right, so cold grower. The blooms are waxy, they're very small, goes with the miniature plant, and they're very fragrant, they're good. And it's a strange Oncidium because it's got some traits that many others would not have. The bulbs, the older bulbs on this, can actually turn a browny colour. They're not rotting or anything like that, they just have a brownish tinge or a browny colour compared with the normal green. And the other thing is unusual about it, the bulb only has one terminal leaf. So that's it, it just has a leaf on the top, which is a strange thing when you think the new growths have multiple leaves. They drop, and it leaves it, the bulb, with a single leaf sticking out the top. So that's a strange trait straight away, but they do fall off eventually. So this has got a nice group of, I hope this is going to stay in focus, I can't see what I'm doing, but we've got a nice set of new growths coming now. We've got one here, 2, 3, 4, and those new growths are coming off of the previous growths, which are still plump. The centre of the plant is shriveled, old and tired. So these plants do tend to move away from the centre, leaving like a dead bit after time, with leafless shriveled bulbs. But nonetheless, the bulbs that the new growths are coming out of are nice and plump. And those are the 4 growths from last season. So it's following on logically with the growth pattern. 1 new growth per previous season's bulb. And providing these new growths push out some reasonable roots, I would expect them to bloom. It has bloomed for me before, and yeah, it's an unusual one. I don't normally buy orchids that have very small blooms. I'm not too keen on having to get a magnifying glass out, but it makes up for the size by producing sprays, arching sprays with many blooms on, and they're fragrant and reasonably long lasting. So that's that one. On to the last one. Okay, on to the last one then, another Dendrobium, and this is Dendrobium discolour variety Broomfieldii. When I had an option to buy this, I had a look at the blooms and I thought, actually that variety is worth having a go. Chances of me getting this to bloom are next to 0. like 0, but just alongside it. I might be lucky one day, but it's a highlight requirement to get this to bloom. So well, hang on, there's somebody at the door. I'll be back. Sorry about that. Parcel for next door as usual. If they don't answer, then they buzz me. You know, there's nothing to do with me. Anyway, it's on their doorstep now. Just hope it don't rain. Right, I don't know where I got to, so I'll virtually start again. I looked at the blooms on this, and this particular variety, Bloomfieldii, the blooms to me seemed more attractive. This particular orchid has many varieties of blooms on it. It is very, very variable. So I would suggest, if you're thinking about getting this, because you can grow warm to hot, which is what it wants, I would suggest that you wait and find one that's actually in bloom so that you can see what you're going to get, because they really do vary a lot. This variety tends to be mostly yellow with bronze tips or edges to the petals and sepals. The combination is very attractive. Whether we ever see them in this grow room or not remains to be seen. This is an Aussie, Australian Dendrobium, also found out as far as New Guinea. It's a warm to hot grower and a highlight lover. So Vanda light or more, and warm to hot. So if you can't provide that, this may be not a good idea getting any of the Dendrobium discolours. Now it's an epiphyte, yes, but it's also found as a lithophyte quite frequently. So it can be found growing in amongst rocks and things like that on the ground. Mainly comes from coastal regions and mangroves, cliffs and stuff like that. And it's often found in places where it would actually get salt spray on it, and it survives it. But these leaves are really thick and leathery. You know, they're like cattleya leaves, really chunky. Not when they're new, but very soon they thicken up, and they really are chunky leaves. So I'm having to go careful with that, because it leans up against something else naturally, because that side is heavier than that side. I was hoping this one would counterbalance it and it would become quite sensible, but it's still, you know, if the pot's dry it will fall if it's touched in that direction. So anyway, this needs a distinct dry rest in winter. Apart from that, it's when it's actively growing, feed and water well, sort of thing. If you're going to attempt to get this to bloom, it's going to need that high light, or it won't do it. It will grow reasonably well without those incredibly high light levels. It will still grow into quite a nice plant. You just might not get the blooms. So this is an experiment for me. If I ever get this to bloom, it'll be a bit of a miracle. But it's a division, so it's difficult to say how big it's going to need to get before it's capable of blooming. It's going to be difficult to tell. Now, the new growth that it had when I got it, let's get it out the pot where I know it's not going to fall over because I'm holding it. That growth's pushed on reasonably well, produced some nice leaves. There's next to no roots in the pot. There are some, but it's growing its latest new growth from underneath this one. So it's going to come out from underneath and then up, which means it will touch the side of the pot. But it's already got new roots forming at the base of this growth, so it looks like the roots come from the previous growth as and when it matures at the start of the following growth. So the latest growth doesn't necessarily grow the roots, but it triggers the roots on the previous growth. So I'm not repotting that. It was done when I got it. It's in chunky bark so that I can keep it drier in winter and not rot the few roots that it had. And when I water it, it gets an absolute soaking. And as I say, hopefully that latest growth will push on and be bigger than this one. And the roots that are now starting to be produced on this growth push on and form a reasonable root system. at least then it will grow into a reasonable plant. Apart from that, there's not much else I can do. So that was number 5. Okay, so there we go. That's the second of a sequence of 3 videos with spotlights on 5 individual orchids from my collection, voted on by viewers. And as we get to the end of this video, your end screen will pop up. You can go straight to that if you're capable of clicking on that and it works for you, to see the first one in the series and see the other 5 orchids, similar style to this. And we will get round to the third one as and when. And the other thing that was asked for was for people to select categories, to do like a generalisation on a category, like Oncidium types, cooler and warmer, Cattleya types, Coelogeny types, yeah? So I've only done one of those so far, so we've still got some of those to do. They're a bit different because obviously they're, you know, just about the genus itself, which would have to be a generalisation, but we've still got some of those to go. So that was this one. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to say so in the comments. Yeah? Let's keep YouTube busy. And don't forget to like if you like the video. And if you're not subscribed, it would be nice if you did so. And if you think this would be of interest to any of your friends or other orchid growers you know, then by all means share it. I've got no problems with my videos being shared on other media, all that sort of stuff. And I will say now, this is your video for the weekend unless I find something short to do, like a new bloom opening. I've got an Orchid Society meeting tomorrow, which takes up well over half the day basically, and I'm not in any mood to film when I come home. I'm tired and I've got driving to do and everything, and I'm probably going to take some plants along tomorrow. All those new members we got at the show, a fair few of them are going to turn up tomorrow, so they've got to be entertained so that we can keep them. So yeah, and our speaker tomorrow is Peter White from Orchid Accessories, the man himself. And he's got a presentation that's not produced by him, but it's come from the orchid nursery in New Zealand that hybridizes and grows Sarcochilus. And there may be some for sale, and I might be tempted, because they're not too happy with high heat. So I had a couple around the other place, they didn't do well. But if there's some that aren't an arm and a leg and a mortgage, then I might come home with some if there are some for sale tomorrow. There might not be, I don't know for sure. We shall see. And I will probably not see you again now until the Sunday chat, so we look forward to that. And then we're all back to normal. I've got no shows, no meetings, no nothing for about a month. So everything will be back to normal, and I'll be struggling to think of things to film. Anyway, see you on Sunday for the Sunday chat. Bye for now. Thanks for dropping by.